Matt, thanks very much for joining us, I'll say, because there are going to be people watching it. Just to give the viewers a bit of a heads up, I'm going to be putting this under my realities of coaching playlist because one thing I see when I do all my traveling and working with coaches is that they're trying to do technical and tactical fixes with their players, but the reality is their players' bodies cannot support what it is their coaches are trying to get them to do. So it would be cool if you could give an overview of the main things that young players struggle with physically that lead to those obstacles.
Absolutely, and thanks for having us on, Chris. It's always a pleasure. The fundamentals basically for me when I'm looking at a young player, especially probably from 12 and onwards, a bit younger than that, and okay, coordination and other things come into play, but from pretty much 12 and onwards is building this foundation of movement and good alignment. Because I think everything else feeds from that base, from that foundation, and taking some time to develop that foundation and improve those alignments and movement discrepancies that people have or kids have just pays off so much in the long run. And with so many players that I've worked with, young, good players, that get this base right, especially in the years when they are changing so much physically anyway, it just sets them up, it gives them that platform to really perform in the future. And vice versa with players that don't actually address these issues at a young age, it does stay with them for a long time because they're putting lots and lots of load and tennis on top of their frame, which may not be able to support that activity very well. The issues kind of tend to snowball a bit, and then you have to spend longer when you do finally address them down the track, possibly through pain or injury, or just a poor performance.
Yeah.
Actually, you end up kind of undoing a lot of this kind of poor movement strategy that they've developed as a result of not being strong enough. Yeah. I know that's a long, quite mealy-mouthed kind of answer, but actually,
perfect.
It all flows from the same thing.
Yeah, because the experiences I've had when I've worked with players, and I don't want the viewer to think that I've never made these mistakes as well, but when I think back to some of the early mistakes I made, you don't appreciate how much the physical conditioning of a player affects the methodical patterns that they end up adapting or adopting to get by. And then when you try, let's say, for example, one player I can remember, we actually got her body in a good physical state, and then we actually had to readdress the technique because it had actually improvised or become idiosyncratic because of the physical deficiencies. So for coaches watching this, it's a absolute go-to, almost like a foundation to lay on top. Now, let me challenge my logic here, because what I talk about, and this could be right or could be wrong, is that, let's say they have that alignment first, and then they can support their own kind of body weight, if you like, and then support movement or force going through that, and then apply the skill of tennis on top of that. Is that a logical?
Yes.
Right.
Almost like a hierarchy of needs kind of thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the thing is that it's a bit counterintuitive, and it feels a bit awkward for me to say that as a strength and conditioning coach, because tennis coaches out there will be saying, yeah, of course you want them to do all their stuff in the gym first and forget not play enough tennis or not do the right things on the court and so on. And so it is a marriage of the two aspects. Tennis players will be loving playing tennis first, and then they will try and adapt their bodies physically for playing tennis. So it will always go like that. But if you had an ideal world, you would have a player with a fantastic foundation, athletic base, and great alignment who then starts playing tennis.
Yeah.
That would be ideal world from the strength and conditioning perspective.
But I think we've spoken about it before on the podcast, actually, about that early specialization pitfall in terms of, the tennis is such a one-side dominant sport that it naturally leads to rounding of the shoulders, strength in the back and one side, scapula lifting, all that stuff. So a big message is do lots of different sports that will give you a good base of those skills anyway.
Absolutely. No, I feel so strongly, and probably didn't notice it as much until I became a parent. With your own kids running around that exposing them to as many different sports and physical challenges as possible, even in the lockdown that we're in at the moment, you know, it's really challenging all of my creative juices towards my son, who is, you know, restricted for space, equipment, and all these other things, that actually think, right, great, let's move. What are the solutions here? You know, and so I just think kids need to be exposed to every kind of crazy type of sport, to formal sports, everything, to really make their body answer questions that they've not answered before. And that's really all that's important.
Yeah, perfect. So you're going to run through a couple of kind of almost screening or things to look out for coaches. And then after that, we're going to have another little discussion about how those might manifest themselves on the tennis court. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I really want to keep this simple, straightforward and usable for the tennis coaches out there. You know, if I was to sit with a tennis coach and they were to talk me through the real in-depth mechanics of shot production and things, or serve or whatever, you know, I wouldn't want them to be using too many technical terms really. So I want to keep this very simple and just have people looking for lines and shapes within the body. I'd like them to just look at their junior players or their senior players and say, what kind of line is that moving in, and what shape is their body making effectively? Perfect. You know, almost like a silhouette. So we'll keep it simple, but really using some of these simple screenings, you should be able to spot some imbalances and some weaknesses and some tightnesses that players will have. And commonly, so many players have these issues. This is not a just your player issue. 90% of the kids that come through my door will have a lot of these imbalances and weaknesses. Yeah. It's just the sooner you nip them in the bud, the better.
Perfect. Right. Get yourself set up then.
All right. So let's take you through the first simple movement screening we use. And I've got a golf putter here, but you could use a broomstick, anything really. You can even use a resistance band actually, and just have that above your head. It's basically anything that gives you a bit of an anchor above the head to fix yourself just here. Okay, I'll give yourself a little bit more room there. Okay, so it's an overhead squat. Very simply, we keep this stick above our head, trying to keep the stick in line with our ears, keep our feet around shoulder width apart, and then we simply perform the squat. Okay, up and down. You only want 3 repetitions of the squat. I always like to obviously get permission from the player first and the parent. Always like to video these things from the front and from the side. It's a great little reference point for the future as well. If you actually record the very first time they do these screenings, it's a really powerful tool in 6-8 months' time, potentially when they've really developed these exercises, to show them and say, look where we were months ago, and then we'll go on to talk about how this will affect their game. Yeah. So essentially, we've got the stick above our head, very simple movement, keeping the weight on the heels, squatting down and back up. Very simple. 2 or 3 reps is all you really need to see what you're looking for. So like I say, I would also look to do that sideways as well. Just like so. Like so. Now, what are we looking for when the player is doing this exercise? So if we take it from the ground up, effectively, with the knees especially, we don't want to see the knees collapsing in as they do this exercise. And this will be the most common thing that you see with young players, is the knees will collapse in. Okay? We'll go on to talk about what that means in a moment. But that's the first thing you're looking for, is knees collapsing. Next, we're looking to see whether the body shifts to one side as they come down. Okay? Now I'm exaggerating, it probably won't be that extreme, but your right-handed tennis player will almost certainly have a stronger left leg. So what they will often tend to do is favour that leg when they're doing bending exercises. So that's something we also want to keep an eye out for. Very simply, you also can tell from the front view here if their arms, if they can't straighten their arms. Okay? So that's another indicator of a movement issue. Then from the side, we want to make sure that their arms are level with their ears. Okay, so we want to make sure that as they go down through the squat, that their arms stay level with their ears. What you'll typically see often is the back pitching forward and the arms pitching forward here as well, which tells us some fairly interesting things about what's happening with their upper body and their mobility. The other final thing you want to look for is the knees, how far forward the knees are going versus how far back the bum's going. If you see my back, my bum's going towards the wall there, that's correct. If the legs are going forward there, past the toes, then that tells me other things.
Yeah.
So, let's look at what this means. So if we've got legs that are collapsing inwards, that's typically the muscles around the hips that externally rotates the hips. The little butt muscles, deep butt muscles, are weak effectively, and they need to be a lot stronger.
Yeah.
And like I say, for 90% of junior players, this is the case. Probably for 60–70% of senior players, this is the case. You know, we see 18, 19-year-old players who don't have good hip control. Same thing like when we talked about sort of pitching to one side. Again, that's saying that they're favouring their dominant leg and this other leg needs more work. So we need to get some work done on these glute muscles effectively to try and clean up this issue. Then when we look at the issues on the side here, when we talked about the arms being bent and the arms not being able to stay in line with the ears, okay, so that's clearly a shoulder mobility issue, and usually it's tight lat muscles as well underneath the arm, okay, particularly on their right hand side. Obviously doing a lot of serving, lat muscles get tight. So that would be a bit of an indicator there for those issues. The other problems that you might find as you come to squat down is the back will arch in this way, so you'll get that C curve in the spine. And the deeper you go, the pelvis will tuck under and you'll have this kind of C curved squat.
Yeah.
When I talk about looking for shapes, I know I've gone into this in quite a lot of depth, but if you're looking for a shape, you want a nice upright shape here and not a C curve shape.
Yeah. You
want nice straight lines here and not, you know, almost that kind of upside down V shape there. Cool. Okay, so we're looking for shapes. That's what we're after in the overhead squat.
Yeah. What about the lunge? Because that's another indicator that you can see that definitely transfers to tennis.
100%. So again, very simple movement screening for lunge. Hands on the waist, and quite simply lunging forward and back. I'm going to come back a little bit more so you can see me. Lunging forward and back. 3 or 4 reps on the right leg, 3 or 4 reps on the left. What we're looking for here is that same knee alignment here. So again, we'll typically see that knee drop in with players that have weak hips. Okay. We'll also might see some dropping of the hips here as well. Okay. So that would also indicate strength around the waist, strength around the core as well. Yeah. So with all of these movements, basically, if you look at where they're breaking down, you just need to think, well, I need to strengthen in that area. If they're pitching to the side, well, I need to be stronger in that area. Yeah. It's relatively uncomplicated if we keep things uncomplicated. Yeah. So that would be the forward version of the lunge, to look for knee alignment, hips, and so on. And then from the side, again, quite simply, we're making sure that the knee isn't traveling past that toe. If that's the case, that means they're dominating with their quads and not using their glutes. Again, another indicator that those butt muscles need to be worked on. Yeah. They also may pitch forward here as well. Yeah. Now, what pitching forward often means could be some weakness around the midriff, but also it could be that they are tight in these hip flexor muscles here, because as you bend, they shorten, these muscles shorten down and pull you forward. Yeah. So that could be another reason why you pitch forward in the lunge. But again, thinking about just simple shapes, you want to see a nice upright body here in the lunge. The final thing is, in just terms of a general strength issue, a lot of players who can't lunge very well will lunge out, then bring their back foot in to push back, rather than keeping a nice still position with their back leg. You will find that they actually collapse forward, bring the back foot in, and stand up. So again, that's just something, just general leg strength. If they're not strong enough to push back, that's something you might look for.
Yeah.
Now, just to throw something in there for players who do those movements very well, one additional movement screening that you could do on them is a simple single leg squat. So just on one leg here. This is a very difficult exercise. So don't be surprised if most players can't do this, most adults can't do this well either, including me. But very simply, you're looking for on one leg, other leg out in front, just sitting back here and standing. Now, people who are advanced can literally go and get their butt to their ankle. I don't think in any universe I'll be able to do that. But, so we all have goals.
Yeah.
but it's an extreme version of putting that leg and those butt muscles again under the microscope to say, okay, you might be able to do it quite well with two legs. Let's give you an additional challenge and let's see how well you do it with one. See if you're pitching forward again. See if you're keeping that back nice and straight as you bend, or if we're getting that little C curve again.
Yeah. Perfect.
Simple exercises, simple shapes, and hopefully simple explanations for things that you can just keep an eye out for as you're watching the kids go through these screenings.
So I've experienced a lot of players struggling with those things, and myself as well, I would say. And I know how it limits them and myself on the tennis court. So if I was to give one example, and then you could add a couple on, the one I always remember, actually, you maybe remember the player, she'll like a shout out, Claire Burney from Scotland. Yeah. And when she first started working with our National Institute of Sport, she couldn't do a lunge. And she couldn't do a side lunge as well. And the knee was going, and they did a really simple program at home for her for about 10 weeks. And I remember very clearly watching her in the Tennis Europe event, and she got to the final of that event, sliding out wide, holding that position on clay, and absolutely like thumping the ball, versus before she would have been out lunging and just using her arm. And that, for me, that was the moment, you know, that I, as a coach, went, oh my God, this is like, the body is so much more important than I gave it credit for. And I kind of used to fall into that trap of thinking it was like, oh, if you're a good athlete, you're a good athlete. But you can actually do a lot of quick fixes, significant fixes, by doing simple exercises at home. So what other examples would you see on the match court for coaches looking out for their players?
So when you're watching the players hit, you see this a lot. Even let's just talk about that lunge that we just talked about there. Even if you're hitting like a closed stance forehand here, you would see a collapsing here. Okay. Now, what does that mean for the shot? Any kind of inappropriate movement is simply a loss of power. It's a loss of energy. So your energy, you really want to be imparting into the ground here on that front leg to really drive up through the ball, where actually a lot of the energy is going that way when we're trying to rotate. All of the energy from the butt and from the calf is now pushing in the wrong direction before we hit the shot. Now again, human bodies are great at coping with this and finding ways of actually being able to hit a great forehand still. But actually, if you think about playing 2 hours of tennis a day, 5 days a week, and doing this hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, what that means for the structures around your hip, the muscles, all the other muscles that will actually tighten up as a result of these ones being weak, it's that snowball effect. So not only does it affect the performance and the execution of the shot, but it also affects the health of the athlete longer term. So that's just simply in terms of the lunge and a closed stance forehand there, or a volley lunge, whatever it may be, of losing control of that knee and the loss of energy and the decreased performance as a result of that. if we look at the serve for our overhead squat and our wobbly knee player for the serve, careful not to take any lights out here, but effectively, if you're trying to generate that force from the ground, and you have, again, all of our energy coming in this way now, rather than in a nice, strong, loaded position here, and those joints all acting really efficiently to get that huge force that we need from the ground to get up to that serve. If all of that, or a lot of that energy is just getting lost through here, again, you're going to lose so much power in the serve. And also, where are you now going to generate your power from? You're either going to get it from your arm, you're going to overarch your back to get more force that way. So the knock-on effect of having inefficiencies through here can be quite problematic.
Yeah, big time.
I talked about shoulders too much, other than in the overhead squat. Again, if you have that player who has that lack of mobility here, who can't keep their arm in good alignment here, well, what's going to happen with the serve? Same thing, really. Can't get their arm in the right position. As they come through, they won't be able to get the proper range, and so they're going to actually start to pinch other areas of the body.
Yeah.
So that's the example, really, for your serve and for your lunge.
Yeah. So I shared there before we started filming this I shouldn't say amusing story, but it was a indication of exactly what you're talking about. A coach sent me a video of a young player. She was about 11 or 12, trying to serve, and he said, I'm trying everything. I cannot get this serve to look right. She's not using her legs. And before she'd even served, I could tell him that, what the issue was, because she was walking to the camera like, what do you call that? Pigeon-toed. Yeah. And then when she served, the knees were collapsing in. So even just the alignment of her walking technique wasn't actually right. So that all these things will manifest themselves massively. And I think, as you mentioned, it's not just a ineffective performance that it will lead to. It could potentially lead to injury longer down the line, the more times they rep it and the more they load onto it. So the thing I would also pass on to coaches is not to be afraid to look for this stuff. It's not beyond your skill set to be watching out for these things. You don't have to be the person to find the right exercises to solve it. There are professionals out there that can help you with that. But even the exercises to solve it, they're not particularly complicated. They're not difficult things to look for. So if you're looking at a player walking or serving or lunging for the ball and their knee is flicking around, that's really the most common issue. And one of the best things, if you can do your players a favor, if you can sort out glute strength and hip stability, you've done them a massive favor already before you've even worried about weightlifting or running or any of the other stuff. You give them that foundation of glute strength and stability with some simple glute exercises. Truly, you've done them a huge turn. Yeah, and I could actually testify. You'll remember a couple of months ago, I messaged you saying posterior tilt. What's going on? I think as tennis players, we spend so much time in that athletic position that it does shorten the hip flexors. And I was noticing rather vainly from pictures that my bum was sticking out, and I've never had a bum before, so I was kind of pleased. But and you were talking about the exercises, like to fire the glutes and to fire the abs and all the kind of hip flexor stuff that you can do. So I can testify 100% that by just doing a little bit regularly, almost like 5-10 minutes every day, makes a big difference. So I'll testify to that.
Yeah, it's so simple that actually when the player's just doing their warm-up, just going through some simple band exercises, going through some very simple body weight exercises, putting a little bit of money in the bank each day it genuinely adds up to a lot. And I know some coaches have heard that before, but actually putting that into practice, being brave enough to spot an area that needs improving and give some simple exercises to improve it, makes a huge difference to these kids. I mean it.
And have you got anything coming up where we could signpost people to get more of this type of information or more ideas on exercises?
I'm starting an online programming system. Essentially, I've got to put a website up on the World Wide Web and get myself out there. And so yeah, I've basically designed some training programs for players to tackle exactly these issues. You know, to build good foundations, to improve performance, but also to avoid injuries. And hopefully, I can help some kids and help some coaches and parents figure out the right ways ahead for their kids.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks very much, Matt. I'll make sure I put your link below so people can go straight there and click on it and dig around in there. But thanks very much for giving up your time. And coaches, please just look out for these things. You can fix them relatively quickly.
Always a pleasure, Chris. Thanks so much again for having me.
Cheers, mate.